Welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, helping you move forward with focus, hope, and confidence, saving you time, money, and your sanity as you build a better life post-divorce. I'm Steve Peck. Deborah Moskovich, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce, brings you the leading experts and researchers in the divorce arena. We'll also speak with those in the trenches, people who've learned from their divorce and how their experience has changed their lives. And they would tell you for the better. Divorce can be a beginning, even if it looks like an end, and rich in opportunity to learn and grow from. And on the Smart Divorce Radio Show, we'll explore how to create a positive outlook post-divorce life. And now, here's Deborah.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Deborah. I'm doing great. How are you?
Very well, because we've got another smart guest on the Smart Divorce.
Yes, of course.
Oh, my guests are smart. Actually, this guest today is brilliant, and I say that really respectfully. We're talking about agreements, cohabitation and prenup, and our guest is Ed Weiner, who's a lawyer out of Minneapolis, who is not only one of the top 100 matrimonial lawyers in the U.S., but he's been identified by Worth Magazine as one of the top 10 divorce attorneys. Oh. So I first interviewed Ed when I wrote The Smart Divorce, and I thought that the information that he provided was really insightful. And I recently reconnected with him doing some other projects that I'm working on, and we talked a lot about prenup and cohab agreements. I'm finding that more and more in the media, you're hearing a lot about these agreements and what they mean and how people are trying to get out of them. And there's not enough of really good information being provided to the general public.
Right. I'm interested about cohabitation agreements as well.
Yeah, of course you would be. I think that it's important because as the divorce rate rises, more and more people, although they are recoupling, they're choosing not to remarry, but they are choosing to live together. Right. So what does that mean? So let me just tell you a little bit about Ed. In addition to being one of the top 10 divorce lawyers in the U.S., he's practiced family law for 4 decades. Although, you know what? I have to tell you something. Ed looks, to me like he's 35. So that's kind of hard to believe. But he really knows what he's talking about because he's an expert in drafting, negotiating, and litigating antenuptial and postnuptial agreements, addressing business valuations, complex property divisions, and other business-related issues. I know that we could probably speak to Ed for hours on divorce, societal impact, the changes to divorce reform. But today we're going to focus really on these agreements that I mentioned, the prenup, the postnup, the cohab, or as Ed likes to call prenups, the engagement ring of the 21st century.
Well, let's get him on. Ed Weiner, welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio.
Give our listeners a basic understanding of the agreements, pre- and post-nup agreements, and also the cohabitation agreements, because, people will often say, it's not for me, it's for the rich and famous, and I'm neither. What do you say?
Well, I say a couple of things. I ask those people, is it important to you what you've accumulated or what you may receive in the future from gifts or inheritances? If it's important to you, you don't have to be rich to consider one of these agreements, especially the antenuptial agreement, which we both are calling prenuptial agreement. It's very, very important for people to protect themselves. Statistically, unfortunately, as we all know, many marriages end in divorce. And if that's going to occur, you want the protection of a contract that will protect you so that you receive your fair share of the financial issues. That is property typically, and spousal maintenance, alimony, etc. So when we talk about the 3 agreements, I have to start by telling you both that the law of every state is different. Yeah. So when I'm talking about this, I'm not giving legal advice. I have to ask people to go to their counsel if they're interested to get the information that's applicable to them, because local law will control these documents. And would you like me to tell you about the 3 documents quickly?
Yes, absolutely.
Antenuptial agreement is not anti, A-N-T-I, it's anti. pre-marriage, prenuptials. Postnuptial agreement is after marriage, and a cohabitation agreement, as we all know, is where the parties are living together and they have the protection in some states of the state law, so they don't have to be married to have certain legal rights. But in every one of those situations, again, you have to look at the applicable law to be able to give good answers.
So can I just ask you something? Like in terms of a cohabitation agreement and a prenup, because what's the difference that you would require in those agreements? As an individual, like if I'm getting married or if I choose to live with my partner, are there differences in terms of what I would want to include in those agreements?
Tremendous differences. Most states, I believe every state, has statutory law that protects married people, that gives them certain rights. For example, on death in Minnesota, a person has a right to elect to take against the other person's will. So based upon the duration of the marriage, that person can seek assets, etc. A cohabitation agreement does not have the same safeguards as a premarital or postnuptial agreement because it's a different situation completely. The people have not married. They have far fewer rights. Under Minnesota law, they have very limited rights under a cohabitation agreement, whereas if you're married to a person, you have many rights based upon the marriage, in a divorce, on a death, etc.
So what's the point of the agreement if you have very few rights?
Well, you're trying to protect those rights. For example, if people live together and they purchase a home together, they would have certain rights under Minnesota law. So you'd put the agreement together to make sure it's clear how much each person has contributed, how they're contributing in the future, if their relationship ends, how those rights will be divided between them. Those assets would be divided in a specific way. So you can have they're basically like contracts, and they will be enforceable. So if you're comfortable not having the protections of a marriage under the law, then you can have a cohabitation agreement, which you can pick and choose some things you can protect.
Yeah, it's important. Ed, when you're working with your clients on developing these agreements, it's very unsexy, and people will say, does my partner not trust me? I'm in this for the long term. I don't see getting divorced. I don't want his or her money. I don't want anything from them. Why should I do it? What do you tell them?
Love is so beautiful in the beginning, isn't it? My God, I'm in love. I don't need any of this.
Those are both terrific points you're making. It's true. It's true. A lot of people see a prenuptial agreement as something that's offensive, something that they should be upset about, etc. But I would suggest that when you look at the statistics, it doesn't mean you're going to be divorced simply because you enter into a prenup or a postnuptial agreement. But it does mean that you are acting as a caring, thinking adult who wants to make sure that the parties can control what happens in the event of a death, in the event of a divorce, rather than a judge. I like to say that antenuptial and postnuptial agreements are very similar to stoplights, red lights, because you can stop a judge from making the decisions versus having you enter into a contract where the two of you make decisions as to what's going to happen in the event of a death and in the event of a divorce. And the reason people get upset is that the belief is that the person who has the majority of the assets is always going to control and always going to have an unfair situation. In fact, agreements in Minnesota have to be fair. If they're substantively unfair at time of enforcement, there's a good chance that the agreement won't be enforced. So when we draft agreements, we try to make them fair, and we try not to interfere with the parties' happiness. I always, for example, recommend that the parties sign their agreement at least a month before the wedding so they don't have the burden of that on them as they're preparing for their nuptials.
Yeah, you know what? That's great advice because, what happens when someone presents them with a prenup, 24 hours before? I would think that it's really not enforceable because,
shotgun.
Should the marriage break down?
Yeah,
like he or she made me sign that just so they're going to march down the aisle.
Well, that is one of the factors. Both of you are correct. It is like a shotgun, and it is something to worry about. Under Minnesota law, if there are probably, as I know, actually, the law of a number of other states, if there's coercion. If someone is pressured into something, and giving someone an agreement for the first time 24 hours before creates, on the surface, a coercive situation. We're about to go into the wedding ceremony, and by the way, sign here.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is that is a situation where a court would likely, depending on the law again, would likely not enforce the agreement.
So is that used as a defense often when someone's trying to break one?
Well, certainly if it's an unfair agreement, and the answer would be no if it's a fair agreement. And so it all depends on what the facts are. And that's vitally important. Lawyers have to understand the facts. And that's one of those areas where people get upset, because they both have to, under Minnesota law, they both have to make a full disclosure of their financial situation. Nobody is to go into this blind. There has to be a full and clear understanding of all of the financial facts and the other facts that are addressed in these agreements.
Is there ever any, I mean, other than coercion, I just hear in the media a lot about these agreements being contested, because all of a sudden, there's so much money made during the relationship, and all of us, that partner wants the money. So what happens?
Well, it depends again on the law, on the state that we're talking about. But what happens is that if the statute, if the law is followed, and if the agreement is not unfair and you haven't violated any of the rules, so to speak, of making an enforceable agreement, the trend has been to enforce these agreements. A few decades ago, there was concern because women who entered into these agreements were seen as perhaps less than capable in some circles as the man. The man was always the person with the money. The woman was seen as this person who had to be protected. And so there was efforts. Obviously it's wrong to perceive women in that light, but that's what was happening, as you know, decades ago.
Yeah.
Women's lib, of course, has changed that along with the outlook of most intelligent people in the world. But the bottom line is that it was a situation where people could knock down these agreements based upon the fact that they felt that one person was not being fairly treated. And we still look at that. If you have an agreement that's unfair, frequently courts which are trying to do justice will find a way not to enforce that portion of the agreement if possible.
Right. What about for the non-moneyed partner? I sometimes see it as a bit of a, and you did touch on it briefly, like a power imbalance. For the moneyed partner, they're, he or she is trying to protect their assets. So if your client was the non-moneyed spouse but wants the best advice, how are you counseling them?
Well, when you say protect the assets, we have to, based upon that full disclosure, look at what the current situation is, and then we have to look into the crystal ball. We look in the crystal ball to try to guess as to what the situation financially is going to look like as the parties go forward. If we're dealing with a very young couple, you have many years to try to guess, and we're talking decades. So what we try to do is figure out, okay, there's a legitimate desire. Let's assume that the bride-to-be has operated her own business for 20 years. This is going to be her second marriage, and they're in their 40s, late 40s, early 50s perhaps. And so in that situation, we can all understand it's somewhat fair to allow her to protect what she's built up over the 20 years. On the other hand, what about what they build up after their marriage? How would that be fair to just say, well, it just goes to the person who receives it? In that example, maybe it would be fair that the owner of the business, the bride-to-be, does start sharing some of the value. It doesn't have to be from the business, but she's in a very good financial position. Would it be unfair to the husband, depends on the facts again, that she would provide some money to him, depending on the duration of the marriage? In those facts, it might be. On those facts, it might be. And so we look at each of those cases. We try to predict where people are going to be. Would it be fair to say she's going to stay home and raise 4 kids, give up her business, give up her profession, and that she gets nothing in the future, where she gave up, say, 18, 20 years of her life raising these kids? Well, I don't think most of us would say that would be fair, that she gets nothing. So we have to look at the facts of each case.
So, and are you building into the agreements now? Like if you're married 5 years, you get X, 10 years, 15 years. If someone has an affair, if someone does, X, Y, or Z. Is that happening now?
Well, that is one of the ways to treat it, of course. And the reason is that if you look at that kind of a program, it does seem that it would be fairer, let's say fairer, to have someone who is married 20 years receive more than someone who's married 20 days or 1 year. If you look at it, there's a disruption in commitment as part of a marriage, disruption in what you were before, what you had before, and commitment to go forward as a married couple, changing roles in life perhaps. So yes, we do look at that. It's not in every situation, but it is a good way to measure and try to create fairness.
I've even seen, I read somewhere, and I think somebody had mentioned that in their prenup, they even had like the number of times they have to have sex a week.
Hello. Well, that might be a good idea. You and I have done shows on marriage reform, Deb, and divorce reform. And you remember me talking about this because I really feel that if I were to reinvent marriage, it would A, cost more money to get a license, B, require a couple of different counseling sessions, and C, have one of these prenups done. Because I think that if you walk a young couple through all of what could happen, and you're talking to this young man and you're saying, look, do you understand that if your business becomes successful and you make this amount of money, then you're going to be required by law to do this? And do you understand this? And he's like signing off to all of that. So how down the road, when the relationship goes south, could they not have this contract come back and say, look, you agreed to this?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that help?
I think I just wanted a couple of points before, Ed gives us his perspective. Number one, sometimes I see these agreements as being like insurance, divorce insurance. What happens if? Just like you have car insurance, you certainly hope you never need it. You hope you're not going to be in this accident, but, life happens. And the other thing is these important financial discussions that you should have, just like you talked about going through therapy, couples counseling about what you want out of life. Mm-hmm. Financially, do you find that enough couples are really coming into your office, having these hard-hitting financial conversations of what the assets are that they're bringing into the relationship, what the debts are? What if someone has a lot of debt? What then?
Okay, well, I've got about 14 questions here. So I like the one about...
I saw you writing away, yeah.
The number of sexual relations they have. I like that from Steve. Let me deal with that first. Yes, there are agreements that have some very unusual provisions. I've seen agreements where the wife was not supposed to buy any gasoline for the car other than a particular stated brand. There are some crazy provisions. We try to stay away from those provisions. They don't make any sense typically. But let's talk about just a young couple first of all. A young couple that is starting out and they kind of are looking at their life as being equal. Nobody has a pre-existing business or investments, etc. We look at what they come to the marriage with. And it's fair perhaps for each of them to retain what they come to the marriage with because they achieved it, they created it, or whatever prior to the marriage. But when you're talking about a young couple going forward, most people would say that it's really unfair because he's going to start his own business or she's going to be in her own legal practice or whatever, that there should be a disproportionate sharing of assets. Most people will say, look, we're entering into a marriage contract where we're choosing roles. Maybe one of those roles would be as a parent for new children. So why would it be that we're valuing one person's contribution more than the other? It's kind of unfair when you think of that. Mom stays home to raise the kids or dad stays home to raise the kids after mom has those children. Is it really fair to say the person who stays home should receive less because the other person is participating in their area of training and education, or they have inherited things and they have a business going? And what do you two think? Is that fair?
Well, again, you're talking about looking into that crystal ball. You're right. It's not fair.
And so, go ahead.
No, I think, and I've got many clients who the woman was, stereotypic, the stay-at-home mom. I've got some clients that the women actually end up being the breadwinners in the relationship, and the guys have chosen not to. They're choosing not to go to work. They can't find jobs, and all of a sudden, everybody wants spousal support for forever. And the marriages really haven't lasted all that long, or they're still young and they're still capable of working. There's a lot of things that...
We have a listener like that right now who's in Canada. His wife was the primary breadwinner, and they happen to have stepchildren. And so now he's looking for spousal support plus child support for his child, which is her stepchild. And a lot of people think that's nuts because this is a guy asking for this.
Well, obviously, I don't think the gender makes any difference in terms of what should be fair and unfair, but clearly an antenuptial agreement or even a postnuptial agreement can provide protections against that kind of situation. I think what you have to look at starting out and looking at it before your marriage, an antenuptial agreement, what you have to look at is what do we really want? You also have to look at what might come down the road for each of them. Gifts, inheritances. So when each family looks at it, by the way, the attorneys need to play a very strong role in helping their clients, because to march them into the same room and say, okay, let's talk about our future, they need their attorneys to explain, as you both have mentioned, that certain bad things can happen, that there are statutory laws that can create certain results they may not like. And this is the way for them to decide their own future by creating their own contract, by having their own determination of how things are going to go if there is a divorce. And when they do that, I always talk about the crystal ball, looking ahead about if children are applicable, taking that into account, and asking, okay, who's going to be home? And how's that going to affect that person's job or career, if at all? And based upon that, if the person stays home for 18 years raising a child or children, or stays home longer than that, is it fair to not have that person somewhat compensated because he or she could have been earning more in their job, their profession? And it's not fair to say, well, I'm the breadwinner, I'm the person who earned it, therefore I should get 80% or something crazy like that.
I love what you're saying, because I think that it encourages couples to have conversations that they might not want to have. And so at least at the very beginning, they're really understanding each other's philosophy going into the relationship. And you know what, Ed, have you seen many couples relationship breakdown because they don't like what their partner's saying?
Well, Debbie, I had 2 cases in my long career where the parties did not get married. We were dealing with premarital agreements. But the premarital agreement allowed them to really understand each other, as you're asking, on very important subjects. They had dramatic disagreements. One of them, the husband-to-be, would never agree to any of what he currently owned or what he would own in the future and his income and that. Nothing would go to his wife, regardless of the fact they could be married 30, 40 years, regardless of the fact they could have had children, et cetera, et cetera. So my client said, wow, that's an eye-opener. I'm not going to marry this guy. Why would I do that? And in another case, the husband-to-be decided not to get married because, frankly, the wife-to-be was so outrageous in her financial requests and commitments in terms of what she was saying she wanted him to do. It was outrageous. And so what you're leading up to, Debbie, is the fact that people should have these conversations. That is the intelligent adult thing to do, to have these conversations and talk about, okay, what happens if I stay home? What happens on your death? Am I going to be beneficiary of something? And what is it going to be versus your 3 brothers, for example? Yeah. And so it's urgent to talk about these things and figure out what you want to happen in 5 months, 5 years, 50 years, and just walk your way through it.
So do you find that couples who are going into second or third time marriage, like they're more mature and have these conversations?
You'd like to think so, but Steve, I don't think so.
Yeah, I know. The divorce rate rises with each subsequent marriage.
Yes. Well, it depends on where you are. But are they more mature? They're more knowledgeable. They've had more experiences. They're more likely to be concerned about their future because it's a shorter term, and they've seen their friends get divorced, and they're well aware of how life works. And they're in love, but I think it's different in a sense. It's kind of, and I don't mean this in a negative way for people who are younger, but a more mature love. Mature being that they have more information so they can make better decisions, and they're not as hesitant to talk about entering these agreements, especially since most of them have children. So they want to benefit their children from their prior marriages. So they want to have a contract to protect those children from the law that might award the new spouse a disproportionate amount as far as the other spouse is concerned, the spouse to be.
Before we even started, we just had a little conversation off air, and you talked about creating your own law.
That's correct.
Can you just, expand on that a little bit?
Sure. It seems to me that it's so clear, and it's such an important thing for people to understand and to do. If you have the ability to create your own result in the event of a death or in the event of a divorce, why would you not want to do that? The legal system operates with a judge making a decision. In some states, it's a jury also. But why would you put your financial future in the hands of a judge or a jury if you have the ability as a couple to work out the financial arrangement that you think is fair, that you think is going to be fair in the future, because you look at the future and you figure out, okay, what's likely to happen? I think it's urgently important for people to at least have the conversation. And you do create your own law. Most of these agreements are enforced. And if they're enforced, what you put into that contract is what happens. Not some judge saying, I don't like this provision, that's not going to be enforced. And then you have to go through a trial. If you have an agreement, yes, a lot of them are challenged, but most of them are dealt with very quickly by the courts, where they'll bifurcate, where they'll just decide the issue of, is this enforceable or not? If they decide that, the agreement then controls, so we don't have to have a trial over all the financial issues, etc. Now, these agreements typically cannot and do not affect custody of children and money flowing to children if in the event of a divorce, child support, that type of thing. Those are almost always excluded from these agreements because the state does feel it's important for judges, if the parties cannot settle, to try those issues and come up with a fair result to protect the children.
I still have some more questions on this topic, but I just want to ask, a postnup, when would you have that, and why?
A postnup is very rare. There are a number of instances where I've considered and been involved in a situation. Let's assume that the three of us, Steve and Deborah and Ed, are partners, and none of us are married. Or one of us is married, it doesn't matter. And we're aware that a business, our partnership, could become involved in Ed's divorce, for example. Well, you two might say, geez, I don't want somebody poking around our business and getting all our financial records and valuing our business and doing all those things that happen in divorce cases. Even though one of us is married now, we all should have an agreement that the two who are unmarried will have prenuptial agreements, and one of the provisions will be nobody gets to touch the business interest. Nobody gets to value it. It's going to be my property. It's my partner's, and you could sell it truthfully because your partners do want both a prenup in the case of you two, and because Ed's married, a postnup, and you want me to have a postnup that says my wife's not going to come after my business interests, is not going to value it, is not going to depose you two in a divorce case, is not going to bring in experts to look at all of the documents and all that other stuff that happens. And so there's a postnup. I'll give you another example of a postnup. A postnup is an after-marriage contract. And that example is, let's assume the parties aren't doing so well in their marriage. They've gone to counseling a number of times, marriage counseling. And one of them, she's a physician and has a brilliant idea to develop something, an invention, that will perhaps make millions of dollars. She works 10, 12 hours a day now as a physician. And she says to her husband, we're not doing so well, and I'm aware under Minnesota law that anything that we own at the time of our divorce is going to be seen as marital property. I'm going to have to share that with you. I want to go ahead and invent this device, but I'm going to have to work at night. I'm going to have to work for the next 6 months to try to put this together. I'm going to be putting in a couple hours every day to work on this. And here's the deal. If we get divorced, I'd like to have an agreement. You'll get 10% of whatever I receive, or some other percentage other than 50%. what I receive. And frankly, I'm not going to put out the effort. I'm not going to invent it. We'll just see how we do with our marriage counseling. Maybe we'll get divorced, but then I'll invent it after the divorce. And that way I'll have 100%, but I will give you 10% or 15 or 20 or whatever if you will sign a postnuptial agreement saying that's what's going to happen. Wow. So that's another example.
Good luck on that one.
Well, it happens. Somebody will say, look, 10% and this thing's going to worth millions. I'm not investing anything. What do I have? Plus, I don't want to be with her at night anyway because I'm not happy. So what do I lose?
Yeah. But what about some of these, for lack of a better example, like the .com millionaires? Like all of a sudden, you've got these young guys becoming like bazillionaires, and are they entitled? Do they sign a postnup so that their partner now isn't entitled to 50%?
Well, obviously the partner has to consent to signing a postnup.
Yeah. So
your example is we have a young person who has become a billionaire, millionaire, whatever, based upon
money.
Her or his efforts. Right. They have a lot of money. And so does that mean that the spouse, let's add something to that example. Let's assume they've been married a year. Now, if they've been married a year, the person who has created all that wealth typically could argue, wait a minute, I was putting this deal together before I got married a year ago, and then you could have proportionate. So it's, for example, somebody could come up with evidence to prove that the premarital work was 80% and the post-marital work was 20%. So that's how you could, even without a prenup, you could go in and try to prove that the other spouse should not be sharing in, getting 50% of these millions, perhaps should only be getting 10% or 5% or whatever. So the bottom line is that's one way. But to get an agreement, you're right. People can simply say no. So there has to be some incentive to influence a person to enter into a postnuptial agreement. And that usually means that everybody's going to receive something, and they decide it's fair what they're going to receive.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Hey, what about cost of these? I'm sure a lot of our listeners are concerned about that.
Well, that's a darn good question, and they can cost tens of thousands of dollars. They can cost much less than that. It's really a product of what is there in terms of not setting it based upon how much they have, but setting it based upon what the issues are and how much work has to be done and how many drafts and how many negotiating sessions. Typically, we will, the attorneys who do this are very sensitive to the parties being involved in negotiating sessions. So we'll generally have, the attorneys will meet based upon separate meetings with their clients to try to keep down that, those bad feelings and interrupting their happiness, preparing for their marriage. In terms of cost, it's a factor, as I mentioned, of the complexity. It's a factor of the people working together instead of fighting about everything. And I've had 10 different, in one case I had 10 drafts of a particular agreement. And so these things can cost, as said, tens of thousands. They can cost just a fraction of that too. It depends on what they're trying to protect. Sometimes it's just, I'm going to inherit some money from my parents, and that will be the only thing that's protected by this premarital agreement. Everything else that we build up is subject to Minnesota law or the law of the state in question.
Isn't inheritance outside of matrimonial property anyhow?
I'm sorry, I missed the
Inheritance. Isn't inheritance outside of matrimonial property?
That's a darn good question, but you have to look at the law again of the state. For example, in Minnesota, everything is presumed to be marital property unless you can prove it's non-marital. Non-marital would be premarital. It would be if you inherited something. It would be if you received gifts that were to you only. But under Minnesota law, our law provides that a judge can award up to 50% of non-marital property owned by the other person to the other spouse.
Okay, so that means that just shows how important, sorry Steve, one sec. So that just shows how important the prenup is then, that non-marital property, is to identify what those properties are going into the marriage so that you can prove.
Exactly, and that's part of the crystal ball. If you know you're going to have inheritances and gifts from your parents, or you're going to have other things flowing to you, it's not just what you enter the marriage with. It's the crystal ball looking at what are you going to have in the future, and that's where children come in. And let me say one more thing before we get back to Steve, and that is a lot of parents should be talking to their children about getting prenups when they get married, because those parents know that the children are going to inherit, and they know there's going to be a gift-giving program, and they know that they want the child to be in the family business or in the family cabin, and they don't want this new spouse that might come along someday to receive any of that in a divorce. So families also have a desire to protect their children and grandchildren, etc., and they should pass on the wisdom to those children and grandchildren so the kids understand, and they're not kids we're talking about, but so they understand that they should do this, and it's not anti-marriage and it's not anti-love.
Oh, no.
Okay,
it's divorce-proofing the family business, which is what we're going to talk about another time.
I was wondering, what if your parents' will specified that their money was to be left to you, only to you? Could they do that?
Well, I'm hoping you're asking if they specified it would go to the attorney, Ed Weiner, but I don't think that's what you're asking. So,
no, but we know that's where it's going eventually. So, it'll all work out in the end.
That's a darn good question, and that was actually what Deborah was saying too, and that is that, well, what if you inherit it? Well, many states, and you should check your state of Michigan, and many states decide that the person is not going to be totally protected even though they inherited it. What if you take a fact situation, a couple's been married for 40 years and they haven't accumulated anything, and the one of the parties inherits $10 million. Should the other party not receive any portion of that when they don't have any other assets to live on, where this other party has to go live on the street? That's an extreme example, but clearly some judge might say, if the law allows, wait a minute, this person can get 50% of that inheritance. Minnesota could be 50%.
Wow.
Because I guess sometimes that relationship was funded by family gifts. Like for the full 40 years, they were living off the family.
Right? And it could have been that maybe the parent, or the person rather, who is inheriting has gone to the casino and spent all the family's money, and the other person has brought in most of the money. And so we have someone who has an addiction and has spent all the money, and now this person inherits the $10 million and saying, hey, you don't get any of it.
What about full financial disclosure? Like, I know when you go through divorce, you always have to provide full financial disclosure. Do you have to? A prenup or a cohab?
In Minnesota, you do, and in most states, I believe you do also, because these agreements are supposed to be enforceable contracts, but they have to be fair. And, contracts have to be fair. If somebody has misled the other party to a contract, has not disclosed everything, has done something that's unfair or unethical, and has, basically created something we'd all say, or most of us would say, wow, that's not right. When you have that situation, courts are going to have typically the ability to knock down the agreement, but you try to build in fairness when you draft these. I always tell my clients, you're going to pay more than what you want to pay under this agreement, because I want to make sure that it's like a life insurance policy. You don't want to pay for it your whole life, and then when it's time for somebody to collect, it's not good. It doesn't work. We don't want this agreement to be knocked down, so we want it to be fair. Both sides should want it.
Can a lawyer compel their client to provide the full financial disclosure like you do in divorce? Well, and sometimes you can't compel, and all the issues around full financial disclosure.
Well, we have to. Of course, we have to tell them, look, why spend the money and the time and the resources and your feelings if you're not going to do this right? You have to do this right. We want this agreement to be enforceable. To make it enforceable under our law, there must be full and complete disclosure. Well, full and complete is the same. There must be complete disclosure of everything. And I have the parties disclose their potential inheritance and everything else going forward as far as we can. I have them just loaded up with disclosure.
But they agree to that at the time of this agreement. But down the road, if this is contested and the other partner feels that they weren't being honest, can they go back and take a look?
Oh, sure. Every divorce case assumes that everyone's going to voluntarily share all of the information, and we obtain it voluntarily, or we obtain it by serving discovery pleadings where they are required to give us all the information. You can't have a fair result if you don't know the facts.
Yeah. And I guess if you don't know the facts, then that's easy. That would be an easier case to go to court and say, look, you know what, I didn't know what I was signing. It wasn't all that honest.
Well, you also have a duty yourself, and your attorney obviously has a duty to have full disclosure. So if there's a divorce case going on, you can't really blame it on the other side if you and your attorney haven't asked for that information.
Yeah.
It's where, and then you'd have a claim, unfortunately, against the attorney. If that attorney did not do what the attorney should have done, it's called malpractice.
Yeah.
So we don't want that to happen.
So, Ed, gray divorce is on the rise. We all know that. I think one of the largest growing divorce markets, are couples that have been married 25, 30 years, 40 years even. I've seen couples in their 70s divorce. If they remarry or recouple, should they look at the cohab or prenup agreement differently than a couple in their 20s and 30s?
Well, as I started saying it early on, you're trying to protect what you have.
Right.
And what you have doesn't have to be $1 million. What you have can be X, Y, and Z. You want to protect X, Y, and Z, so everybody of every age should be considering this protection. You may decide, I don't care at my age, I'm not going to protect it, which doesn't make a lot of sense because as we get older, we have a lot of expenses we don't want to have, like, caregivers and being in various facilities and this and that. The bottom line is that everybody should really look at their situation and determine what's best for them in terms of trying to protect what they have. And these agreements, cohabitation agreements, postnuptial agreements, prenuptial agreements, they can provide the safety net. And that's what we're looking for.
Right. So would you talk about pensions and life insurance in these agreements then? Would that be part of it?
Well, it depends. Certainly. It would be part of it in terms of the age of the parties, what they already have, what they're projecting they're going to have, of course. We're talking about typically people who get married, they might want to protect what they built up in their retirement prior to the marriage. Then they may say, whatever we build up during the marriage, we're going to share as marital property. That would be one way to do it, which most of us would consider to be fair. So we look at all of those assets. Every asset that exists or that could exist should be addressed if possible.
It's great. Food for thought. There's so much here, I think, that gives people the conversations that they need to have. Ed, any parting thoughts that you'd like people to know about agreements?
Well, I just started talking. I was hoping we could talk for another 14 hours. Can we do that?
I told you. Like, you know what? We've got hours and hours and hours of questions.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions, too.
Well, I know. And the last thing I would say is people should understand, as I've said before, that this is not an effort to hurt the couple getting married or the married couple with these types of agreements. It's an effort to create fairness. It's an effort to control your own future, to create your own law. And I think it's something that everyone, not everyone's going to want to do it, but everyone should at least look at it, think about it, and decide what's best for them.
I love that. And I think knowing that and having that conversation, you'd actually hope that perhaps it's even a healthier relationship going in because you're more aware.
It should be a healthy relationship. And Deborah, I wanted to tell you something about the SMART guides and what you've put together. I've gone through some of your material, and I'm going to be passing it out to my clients. Not passing it out because I can't violate your rights.
Well, be careful; she'll come after you.
$54.99. It's a cost-effective way to educate your clients.
Well, I agree. It's really terrific, and I'm going to recommend it. Just fabulous material.
Hey, and while we're promoting each other here, Ed, what is your website?
My website is, the way to get to me is to go to moss-barnett.com and look up Weiner. My email is Weiner being winner with one N, at moss-barnett.com. I'm in Minneapolis, so no one's ever heard of me. That isn't true.
No, as a matter of fact. And, Ed is one of the lawyers that I interviewed for the Smart Divorce, so he might be living in Minneapolis, but you came very highly recommended. Ed.
Mr. Top 10.
Yeah, Mr. Top 10. So there you go.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed talking to you, and I think you're doing a wonderful thing for people who listen to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. We'll catch you soon.
With it, that was really interesting to me because I feel that one of the reasons people get divorced is not really understanding what their partner is all about.
Absolutely.
And if you sit down and really have these really tough conversations, maybe you're learning some of the obstacles going into the relationship that you need to work on before you make that commitment. So there you have it.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's wonderful. And speaking of the Smart Divorce and all of your wonderful stuff, how do our listeners get more information on you?
Go to www.thesmartdivorce.com. And there's a wealth of information there in terms of what you can find in terms of this Smart Divorce Toolkit, which is what Ed was referring to in the show, and my coaching services. Please email me at info@thesmartdivorce.com or call at 905-695-0270. Would love to hear from you.
Based out of Toronto, serving the entire world, Deborah Moskovich and the Smart Divorce, ladies and gentlemen. Always a pleasure, Deborah. We'll catch you next time.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
As always, I hope the program helped you. If you have a comment or question you'd like to ask us, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a voicemail on our listener line at area code 248-686-2256. Or drop us an email with your question or comment to divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. New programs are available every week on divorcesourceradio.com, as well as iTunes, BlackBerry, Stitcher, and all over the web. If you'd like to be notified when new programs are available, you can follow us on Twitter. Our follow word is Divorce Source. Also, if you're not listening from our website, I invite you to stop by divorcesourceradio.com, where you'll find a complete program archive. If you're looking for a specific subject, simply type it into our search engine, and chances are you'll find what you're looking for. We also have other resources available at our website as well. And while you're on our website, click on the Facebook icon and join the growing Divorce Source Radio Facebook community. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make it a great week and stay healthy. I'm Steve Peck.